hosted the event on republicanism, and it was a meeting about ideas. It was a meeting about seeing what common goal we shared in the breakup of the British state. Definitely the common goal, but we wanted to discuss how we could work together in campaigning for that. It was a conference of the left as well, the socialist conference, or socialist event. And the Irish Socialist Network sent delegates and supporters to it, and Dan was one of those who came from the Irish Socialist Network. So we're already working collectively in solidarity with other socialists in Britain and Ireland, and I'd like to introduce Dan Flynn from the Irish Socialist Network.
Thanks, folks. Just give you a sense of the way things are in Ireland at the moment, to set the scene a bit and give some idea of what prospects might be for the left and for the workers' movement over the next few years. It's useful to begin with a quote from Brian Lenihan. Brian Lenihan is our finance minister in the Republic in the 26 counties. And for anyone who's not familiar with him, it has to be said that he's been honoured internationally. In 2008, the Financial Times published a league table of all the finance ministers in Europe, and they ranked Brian Lenihan second from the bottom. And of course, he wasn't happy with that. So last year he put in a lot of hard work, a lot of stars, and he was suitably honoured with the bottom. Brian Lenihan last April, was addressing a meeting of businessmen in Dublin, and he said a remarkable thing for a politician to come out with. He said that our partners elsewhere in Europe have been amazed at the Irish capacity to take pain. If you tried to do in France what we've done in Ireland, there'd be riots. And he was absolutely delighted with himself to be able to say this. And I'm quite sure, having lived in France for a time, that if there had been an attempt to do half of what the Irish government has done over the last year and a half, there would have been riots, and then some. If you're a socialist or if you're in any way progressive left inclined, it's been very difficult to turn on the radio, turn on the TV, open a newspaper in Ireland without having your blood pressure shoot up, because all that we've heard for the last year, and probably in Britain it's much the same, is just a parade of all the old stale reactionary cliches about how we all have to come together, we have to share the pain of this crisis, we all have to make sacrifices. I was reading the paper on the way over on the plane today, and our Taoiseach Brian Cowan was invoking the memory of Easter Uprising and saying that those men and women made sacrifices for Ireland, now we must make sacrifices for Ireland. And what he means, of course, is that the working class has to make sacrifices, because there's been an absolute steely determination on the part of southern governments that the cost of this crisis has to be borne by workers. Under no circumstances will the wealthy have to pay any of the price for it. At all costs, they're going to bail out every single penny that was lost by bankers, by property developers, all the people who stoked up the property bubble in Ireland that's crashed. People who are responsible for the economic crisis, they're not going to find themselves out of the pocket. Already they spent about €10 billion bailing out the banks, and they're going to spend tens of billions more over the next few years. So that's one thing. Now, why is Lenihan able to smugly boast that there haven't been riots in the street, that there haven't even been protests in the streets, that the government has to stay accountable? Well, in Ireland, for historical reasons, the left is a lot weaker than it has been in many other countries in Western Europe. And you could go on about that for a long time, you could write books about it, people have written books about it, but basically all the reasons come back to the legacy of British colonialism in Ireland, the fact that the country's been divided into two states, and so on. But that doesn't mean that there can't be resistance today. We're not, locked to repeat everything that went wrong in the past. It's not inevitable like that. The resistance to the cutbacks so far in the South has been organised by two main forces, by the radical left and by the trade union movements. And the radical left, when we try to organise protests, have been able to get hundreds of people out in the streets. Maybe we're lucky a couple of thousand. The trade unions, when they try to organise protests, have gotten hundreds of thousands of people out in the streets on the few occasions when they've tried to do it. And that's not surprising that you'd have that kind of gap, because socialist groups in Ireland, between them, have a few hundred members. They punch above their weight, and whatever criticisms you could have of tactical decisions people make, they're probably doing about as much as they could at the moment. The unions have hundreds of thousands of members, so it's not surprising that they're able to mobilise people like that. But the reason why the government is still proceeding with its agenda of cutbacks is that the unions, when they organise demonstrations, they haven't seen it as the big aim of building a mass movement that's going to start by resisting these cutbacks, force them back, and then begin to fight for a new kind of society altogether. They've seen it as a bargaining tool to get into talks with governments and with the employers. And the reason they see it that way is because for 20 years that was the way things were done in Ireland. That was the way trade unions did business. They'd get together in government buildings with the employers' representatives, with government ministers. They'd sit around, they'd work out a national wage agreement, and that would be it. And there'd be no need for messy business, no need to go on strike, no need to have shop stewards causing trouble on the shop floor, nothing like that at all. It would all be decided in the centre. And now, when that was going on, the employers were always very clear about why they were doing it, because it was a way when there was a boom, when there was nearly full employment in Ireland, you'd keep wages from going up too much, and you'd also keep the unions inside the tent and stop them from running around causing trouble for people. But the unions started to believe their own rhetoric and believing that class conflict had its day. There was no longer any division between employers and unions, between workers and capitalists. We're all on the same team, we're all wearing the same jersey, we can come together. And they found it bewildering when they realised that the employers never believed that, and now that the boom is over, now that the economy is in crisis, they're going for the jugular. They want to take out the unions the way Thatcher took them out in Britain in the 80s. And people can stand up, and we all do it in Ireland, probably elsewhere, and accuse trade union leaders of betrayal, sellout, and so on. And sometimes they deserve it. But you have to look beyond that, and I think there's a deeper reason why they've been so conservative and so limited in their approach. And it's something that cuts to the heart of what we're talking about, socialism in the 21st century. That since the 80s, a lot of the people that we talk about, trade union leaders, they come from backgrounds in socialist organisations themselves. But what the union movement, the workers' movement has lost is the idea that we're fighting for a completely new society, that when we challenge aspects of the status quo, we're not just talking about tinkering with the system, we're talking about replacing it with something completely different. They've lost that. And they've replaced it with the idea that capitalism is here to stay, there's no alternative, things are going to be the way they are today for the foreseeable future, and in the meantime, all that you can hope is to get a seat around the table, represent yourself as some kind of sectional interest, and get a few crumbs. And that attitude means that they're not capable of leading the kind of movement that's actually going to defeat these cutbacks and start the fight for a new society. So where are we going to go from here? I'll just finish up by saying that I think the work that's done by people on the left in Scotland, in France, in Denmark, in many other countries in Europe is going to be very important, because the power of a good example can have a huge impact in mobilising people. Unfortunately, in Ireland, people right across the political spectrum, they don't tend to look beyond Britain for their political examples. They don't pay too much attention to what's going on in France and Germany or Scandinavia. Even so, those examples have an echo, particularly when things happen in countries like Scotland that are close to us culturally, geographically, speak the same language, have a shared tradition and history in many ways. And when the left is able to mobilise here, and I hope that over the coming years we do see the radical left in Scotland coming back up, building yourselves back up to the level that you were 5 or 6 years ago, and beyond, and then going beyond that and winning new victories and reaching new heights. And if that happens, then I think it's going to have a very positive example, a set of very positive examples for Ireland, and it's going to help us to build the kind of movements that I'm talking about. So I hope that conferences like this and connections and networks like this that Frances has been talking about can make contributions to that. Thanks.